Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Do you feel the unity yet? You're just basking in all the unity. You know the George Floyd trial? It's March 29th. It's coming up, March 29th. Jury selection starts on Monday. And by the way, the cops are all going to be acquitted. All the courthouse and the jail and the police stations are already boarded up in Minneapolis. You know, because of all the unity. Let's talk about this. Let's get the true story. I don't know what we do as a country to unite. Like what? There can't be unity. Now, Trump on Sunday at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, conservative gathering in Orlando, on Sunday, he spoke about how conservatives need to unite, and that's true. But the country uniting, I don't see it happening. Because the question is, unite around what? I'm not uniting around abortion. Unless, of course, the left wants to unite around me on abortion. Then I'm all for unity, but it never goes that way. So let's logically think about unity here. First, there's a difference between policy and principle. Policy, which is politics, that's no place for unity there, right? Politics is the place to disagree on policy. David Arsani has made this point on our show a couple times before. He says the only place in the world where you have unity on policy is North Korea and China and places like that. But when the left today talks about unity, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about unity over here. They say, hey, you need to agree with us on abortion. You need to unify with us on the Green New Deal. You need to unify with us on defunding the police or whatever it is. We are always having to unify with them in policy. And David Arsani and me, and I hope all of us can be like, no, we're not going to unify on that. This is the place to disagree. So stop even thinking about unity when it comes to policy or politics. It's a trick that the left is using to silence you. And it's an easy rebuttal. The rebuttal, like they'll say, hey, let's unify. I'm like, okay, great. You unify with me. Everyone agrees with me now. Are we good with that? And of course, they'll see immediately what a foolish argument they're making. So we disagree about policy. That's the point of it. Principles, however, are a different story. Principles we must unite on. Policy we should disagree on. Principles we must unite on. And you'd think that we could find a few that we could agree on. But we don't. Why not? Why can't we unify around principles today in America? The reason is because a large portion of this country, now this is a nuance here, it's either a large portion of the country believes this, or it's a very small minority with a hugely disproportionate influence. I'm not sure which. I actually think it's the large portion. Either way, I'll go with large portion. A large portion of this country thinks that there's no such thing as truth. That's a problem. You can't have a principle at all without truth, let alone uniting around a principle. You can't even have a principle without truth. You know, we talk on this show all the time about postmodernism and this Marxist march through the institutions. The foundational truth of postmodernism is that there is no truth. Now, it's an easy rebuttal here, right? If someone says there's no truth, you just say, okay, well, how do you know that's true? So what they really mean to say is, oh, well, there's only one truth, and that is that there is no truth. It makes no sense right from the jump, this postmodernism, right? It makes no sense right from the very beginning. But they still push this philosophy on every single aspect of our society. And they force feed this to our kids, that there's no such thing as truth. I mean, they argue that there's not even a such thing as gender. I saw a list the other day of 127 different genders. 127 genders. So I scrolled through the list, and there were two missing, male and female. So out of the 127, they missed the two. Okay? And that's why they do this. They do that because if there's no such thing as gender, then there are no truths at all. Okay, let me give you an example of a principle here, and we'll break this down. A simple principle that you think we could all agree on is life is sacred. 3 words. Life is sacred. I want to play this clip here of Rush Limbaugh on Phil Donahue's show it was either 91 or 92. And he was asked about abortion, but he didn't answer the policy question. He did eventually, but he didn't start answering the policy question. The first thing Rush did was strike the root and laid out his principle on the issue first. Here it is.
My point about abortion is not based upon my desire to force my view on anybody or my will on anybody. And my view on abortion is not contained to abortion. My view is actually one based upon a reverence for the sanctity of life, which I'm concerned is being cheapened in America, not just in the womb, but in other areas. We now have the right to die in this country, but as it's being practiced, it's right to kill. We are deciding who lives and dies based upon the convenience to us. And I'm very much concerned as a citizen and as a member of the human race that the legacy we leave succeeding generations is going to be devalued to the point that other areas of society are going to suffer as well. I think rising illegitimacy, I think rising crime rates. Look at what's happening in New York City at Thomas Jefferson High School. When you and I went to school, we might have had arguments with people. It never crossed our mind to shoot somebody. But it's now no big deal for a kid to shoot another kid in New York or a lot of other cities. And I think it's because they think life is cheap. And I'm very much concerned that life be revered and sanctified.
So good, right? So he was asked about a policy position, abortion, which he got to right after that. But he starts off, hold on, let's talk principle. Life is to be revered and sanctified. Life is sacred. That's a statement of principle. And you'd think we could all unify around that. But then you get these postmodernists who come in here and they apply critical theory to it. And they ask these questions. Well, what is life? Not only when does it begin, but when does it end? Should we, are you really living when you're 95 and dying? Should we just kill everyone over 90? What about 80? Maybe 60, I don't know. Why not? Should we define life by one's usefulness to society? Is that how you measure a life worth living? Your productive capacity? Is that life? What is life? And then you get to sacredness, right? That means connected with God. So can anything be sacred in an atheist culture? Can anything be connected to God if there is no God? So if there's no truth, you can't even make a principled statement to unite around. See? And that's a problem. Because if we're talking about unity, and there are no principles to unify around, then we end up unifying around policy, or even worse, people. And that's a big problem. Real quick, I mentioned critical theory a second ago. Remember a week or so ago, we did this whole segment on the difference between critical theory and critical thinking. Those are not only different things, those are opposite things. They sound the same, but they're opposite. Critical thinking is asking questions and defining terms so that you get closer to the truth. So this question, life is sacred, if you ask questions, the statement, life is sacred, if you ask questions like, well, what is life? How do we define life? What is sacredness? That's good. Those are good questions. That's critical thinking. We're asking questions in order to get closer to the truth and understand things deeper. Critical theory can ask the same questions, but it's with an attitude and a purpose of destruction. Well, what is life anyway? Sacred. What is sacred? All right. So that point is to destroy the thing you're talking about. That's critical theory. And that's the leading philosophy of the day. Critical race theory, critical gender theory, all in subsets of the umbrella of critical theory. Make sense? A little bit of an aside. So, what do? How do we unite on principle? I got a couple things. First, we need to reject the premise that there is no truth. Truth exists. That's why this show is called True Story. There is such thing as truth. The problem is there's a lot of people in power and influence who say that there is no such thing as truth. And they are wrong. And we need to debate them forcefully and proudly. There is truth. It exists. Second thing, we need to stop putting ourselves into groups, right? You want to talk about unity, right? If we want unity, then stop dividing us based off of groups. Makes sense? That's obviously the first thing that they need to do to divide is to put us into little tiny separate groups. First, they hyphenated us, African American, Hispanic American, as opposed to just American. But now it goes even deeper than that. This is an extreme version, but this is a person describing their group identities.
I am a white transmasculine femme non-binary, temporarily mostly able-bodied, neurodivergent, obsessive-compulsive, chronically ill, culturally Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, non-monogamous, demi-low romantic, gray demi-bisexual, survivor of acute and complex trauma, millennial, and cat parent in mental health recovery.
So, I did the research for you on a couple of these. Because who's not familiar with gray sexuals? A gray sexual is someone between asexual, meaning you have no sexual desire, and sexual, so you're gray sexual. That's the flag. A demisexual is someone who only has sexual attraction to someone that they have a emotional connection to. So a gray demi-bisexual is someone who can be sexually attracted to someone. They're not normally sexually attracted to anyone, but they could have a sexual attraction to someone if they first have an emotional attachment. Do you see how stupid this is? And each one of these things has their own flag. Did you guys put up the gray, there's like a gray demi-bisexual flag or something. It's like the one that's like green. There should be another one with like a triangle and it's like green or something. They have their flags. Oh, there's one more. It's like, they're demi-bisexual. Like, what? So this is intersectionality, right? You're not Mike or Chris or that girl's name is, I don't know, Katie. You're not those things. You're not even just white or black or gay or straight. You're now an intersection of all these different things. And the more oppressed identities you can claim, like that person, the greater your victimhood status, and therefore the greater your voice as you're speaking towards justice issues. Okay, it's insanity. One more quick example here. Yale Law Journal, right? Can you think of a more woke place than Yale Law School? The head of the Yale Law Journal apologized for the journal's troubling history of marginalization. So without going into it, this person apologized for systemic racism, and the head of the journal is a gay Hispanic from a poor single-family home. So the low-income, gay Hispanic is too white supremacist for the woke mob. Stop dividing ourselves. What is wrong with us? The people who do this, they're the real virus, right? Because this whole division thing, like this intersectionality, it started out as this little teeny tiny, there's a few people on college campuses who did this nonsense. And then it has spread. And now it's a full-fledged global health emergency. And I mean that's truly global. New York Times wrote an article the other day, France, saying they're worried about American Marxist philosophies making its way to France, even though this stuff started in France 60 years ago. This is the real virus. And these people have a massively disproportionate influence on our culture. Give them nothing. So, in conclusion, the true story. Don't unite around policy. Argue, debate forcefully, strongly, proudly. Unite around principle. And don't let people who say there's no such thing as truth win. And don't let them put you in a group. True story. Mike Slater. Talk about schools opening up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, conservatives should not be fighting for schools to reopen. Hear me out. I want to get to the true story on this. Yesterday, we did a segment on opening up our schools. And we played a clip of Donald Trump at CPAC, right, the conservative conference, saying we need to open up our schools, and the crowd cheered. And I get it, right? I understand the whole thing. But we really need to think about this. Conservatives say it's outrageous that schools are still closed. In California, they are, and in many other places. Schools are still closed. But also, you should never want public schools to open again, ever. It's the real take and the real stand we should be taking. Because it's weird. It's weird to say, hurry up and let's get our kids back to school, where my second grader will then be taught critical race theory and the 1619 Project and transgenderism and have drag queen story hour and generally be surrounded by people who hate me and my worldview. Hurry up and open, and open up, right? You see the tension here? Like on the one hand, it is, and it's true. Like it's outrageous that these politicians have still kept schools closed. That's true. But also, these places are terrible. And we should never drop our kids off to them ever anyway. So let's keep them closed forever and come up with something way different. Are you with me? Listen, we know the government doesn't do anything right. So why do we keep thinking that they educate our kids right? And why are we in this weird position where we're fighting to hurry up and open schools? Before the pandemic, we were arguing that we should be coming up with different solutions anyway. And now we're arguing, hurry up, open the schools. No. We should not be fighting for public schools to open. We should be fighting for them to close forever. And Republicans missed this opportunity. I'm so angry at them. Missed this opportunity to keep public schools shut down forever. There's never going to be an opportunity like this. You're never going to have a year where public schools are closed for Republicans to come in and say, hey, let's come up with something totally different. Like that opportunity will never happen again. And you blew it. Not you. Republicans in power blew it. We should be fighting for the public schools to shut down, and instead be fighting for school choice and charter schools and funding kids instead of systems. What do I mean by that? Money should be going to parents to educate their kids however they feel best, not keep funneling the money to the unions. They're the ones who are keeping the schools closed. School choice, charter schools, and also personally, please look into private schools for your kids. I know there's a lot of people who think, oh, I don't make enough money for private school. And yeah, maybe you don't for the one that's $60,000 a year. But a lot of these private schools are very affordable and they have scholarships. If you don't think you can afford it, please inquire, call them, ask. Do whatever it takes. What's more important? Do whatever it takes to keep your kids away from these people in public schools. These people who hate you and hate your worldview. Let me back it up. There's a group called Gorilla Moms. Right? I love their Twitter page. Mama wants her babies back in school. Is that right? So someone in this group took a video of the president of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers. Berkeley is outside San Francisco. This is the teachers union president. Right? And we have the video here of this person, this teachers union president, dropping his 2-year-old daughter off for in-person class at a private preschool, all right? All the other schools are closed, and he's the one keeping them closed. And that sounds dramatic, because yeah, there's a lot of people behind this, a lot of players involved. But if you had to put it on one person, it's this guy, that guy right there with the dreadlocks, the head of the teachers union. And you have your own version, right? You have your own local teachers union and a head of the teachers union, right? They're the ones keeping your kids out of school. If they said, let's do this, let's head kids back to school, then kids will be back in school. But they keep making stuff up. Oh, we need all the teachers to be vaccinated. Okay, teachers are vaccinated. Oh, well, now we need all the kids to be vaccinated. It's like, whoa, we haven't even tested it on kids yet. So if you're waiting for kids to be vaccinated, it's gonna be until 2022. Like, so you're out of your mind. Why are they doing this? They're doing this for the money. Money. It's not for your kids. It's for money. The longer they hold out, the more leverage they have over you. And when they get more money, they also, because we have to keep everyone spaced out, 6 feet and all that stuff, that means they have to hire more teachers. And that means more union members. That's what all this is about. Never, please, I beg of you, never again, for the rest of your life, promise me right here, right now, never, ever will you ever fall for the lie that the teachers union cares about your kids. Never fall for that. The teacher, your kid's teacher, might care about your kids, although never as much as you do. The teachers union does not, never has, never will. They care about money and union dues, period. Public schools for the union, the union views public schools as an employment racket. That's it. Anyway, in England, they've been way. My brother lives in England, and our neighbor's family lives in England. They're like crazy over there. Like they're like way overboard on fear of COVID. Our neighbors, whenever they talk to their families back in England, they get scared, right? Because it's a very different mindset they have over there in England. I don't even know if it's justified or rational or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is they're taking it very differently over in England. But still, in England, schools were the last thing to shut down. Everything else was shut down first. Schools were the last thing to shut down, and they're the first thing to reopen. I know, at least in California and many other states, they were the first thing to close, and now they're going to be the last thing to reopen. And it's that guy with the dreadlocks who has the power to keep your kids out of school. And he's doing it for his own benefit, except for his kid, I should say. Except for his kid. His kid gets to go to preschool still, of course, in person. Okay, so that's that story. And that's outrageous and hypocritical to say the least, right? But you have a role in this too. If you still want your kids to go back in public school, that's your fault. Because it's the same people. Do you know what I'm saying? The same people who are hypocrites and don't want your kids to go back because of the union dues and all this stuff, right? Once you send your kid there, once the school's open, it's the same people who are now teaching your kids. They're now in charge of your kids' education, right? Like that guy with the dreadlocks, he's still gonna be running the show when we open up the schools again. And you have your own version of that guy in your district, right? They're the ones in charge of the school that you so badly want your kids to go back to. Why? Why do you want your kids to go back to these places? Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is going to be recalled, which is awesome. His kids have been going to private school for months, meeting in person for months. Why do you send your kids to public school when these people don't? This is one of my favorite facts. 11% of parents enroll their kids in private school. 11%. But among public school teachers, 20% enroll their kids in private school. Hold on, that's twice the average. 20% of public school teachers enroll their kids in private schools? In Philadelphia, as you see right here, 44% of teachers enroll their kids in private school. And that's true of every major city there. You see 39, 34, 34%, 33%, right? 44% of members of Congress enroll their kids in private school. Walter Williams, he's the one who found those numbers. He makes the case that if you found out that the chef of a restaurant and the waiters and the busboys of a restaurant would never eat at that restaurant, would you? What do they know that you don't? If an employee of an airline, if they get free flights on that airline, but they would rather pay to fly on a different airline, what would that tell you? Do you still want to fly on that airline? If you had someone who works at Delta and they're like, I'm never flying Delta. I'd be like, why not? If hospital, and this is like the superintendent. I just read a story this morning. The superintendent of Alexandria, his kid goes to a private school, so that'd be like the pilot. That'd be like if a pilot of Delta was like, oh, I'm never flying Delta. Like, what do you mean? If hospital employees got free health care at their hospital, but pay full price to go to another, what would that tell you? But we do this with public schools. They failed. They have failed. And no one knows that more than the teachers themselves. Don't look at what they say. Look at what they do. Imagine if we passed a law that said anyone who works for the public schools has to send their kid to the public school. There'd be a lot of teachers against that, a lot of superintendents against that, a lot of union members, union leaders against that. We need to defund public education, fund kids. Don't send your kids to public school. Do whatever you need to do in your family to get out of public schools now. Even if you think it's a good school, the curriculum is still controlled by the state, right? Still controlled by the state. They're still learning about transgenderism and postmodernism and Marxism and all this other propaganda. Stop sending your kids to these buildings. Stop sending your kids into the control of these people. And you're like, oh, well, my kids are in the accelerated classes. Nope. They won't even exist for long. The Boston School District had an accelerated program called Advanced Work Classes, and they got rid of it, right? Too many white and Asian kids. The superintendent said there's been a lot of inequities that have been brought to the light during the pandemic that we have to address, and a lot of work that we have to do in the district to be anti-racist and have policies where all of our students have a fair shot at an equitable and excellent education. So they got rid of it. So the goal of these public schools is equity. Equity, as we've talked about many times, means equal outcomes. So what's the best way to achieve that? Not lift the underachieving kids up, but to tear the overachieving kids down. 70% of kids in that program in Boston were white or Asian. And white or Asian kids only make up 24% of the district. So instead of the district saying, what's going on here? Why are there so few black and Hispanic kids in this program? Are black and Hispanic kids inherently dumber than white and Asian kids? Are black and Hispanic kids inherently, what do they have, fewer brain cells? No, that's not it. Of course that's not it. So something cultural is going on here. So let's get to the root of that. But instead of doing that, instead of figuring out what's actually going on here, instead of getting to the true story, they just decided to tear down the kids who are achieving for equity. So when you say, oh, my kid, a good school, my kids go to a good private school, and they're in the accelerated program, they're not for long. Get out of there already. I will never forgive Republicans in power for not taking the chance with COVID to stop funding public schools and instead fund our kids. Democrats never let a crisis go to waste. And we did. Coming up next, we'll talk about the Equality Act, and then we'll talk about H.R. 1. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, the Equality Act is being debated in D.C. right now. I have no idea what it is. I don't have the slightest. But hopefully red flags go up for you when you hear the name of it. The Equality Act. I'm guessing it does the opposite. That's one of the themes of the show. Perhaps the opposite is true. And I have a feeling that this is one of those things. Jennifer Braceras is here. She's from the Independent Women's Forum. Miss Braceras, how are you, ma'am?
You said you have no idea what it is, because I think that's deliberate.
Yeah, well, exactly. So help me. Start from square one here. Where do we begin?
So the Equality Act, in short, changes all of our federal anti-discrimination laws to prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender identity as opposed to sex discrimination. And so what the left says it does is they say, oh, this act is going to protect, it's going to protect people on the basis of sexual orientation, and it's going to protect transgender status, and it's going to protect people from discrimination. But it's actually really a lot more complicated than that, because they're changing the definition of the word sex, and they're changing it across the board when it comes to housing, sports, education, credit, everything. So they're fundamentally erasing women from the sex discrimination laws.
How? So this is based off the 1964 Civil Rights Act, right? So give me an example of that act and the original definition of sex being used properly.
Well, obviously in 1964, when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race and sex and a few other categories, sex referred to the binary concept of male or female. And that law doesn't just protect women, it protects men as well. So anytime an employer advantages one sex over the other, if it gives privileges to women in the workplace over men, it's violated that act. If it gives privileges to men over women, it's violated the act. now, under this Equality Act, it's not just employers, it will be landlords, schools, coaches, everything. They are going to be prohibited from discriminating on the basis of gender identity. And what that means is very nebulous. That does not just mean the small portion of transgender individuals in this country. Gender identity is much broader than that. It's whatever you identify as on a given day, right? So it's a very nebulous category. It will be very difficult, I think, for people to know how to comply with this.
Yeah, so sex was male, female. That's
correct.
Clear, concise. You said binary, right? But now there's no such thing as that. Actually, in the first segment, we talked about the 127 different genders that exist. And in this list of 127, male and female wasn't even on it. Right?
Oh, great.
So they missed the two. So you can't discriminate based off of anyone's gender identity.
Correct.
Give me an example of what that would look like, or how this would end up in the courts. Like, who would sue who over what scenario if this thing passes?
It could be any scenario. I mean, so let me give you one example. One example is a transgender individual who was born male and identifies as female would sue to participate on a women's field hockey team or a women's track team. That's sort of the most common example that people are talking about, but it could be something as obtuse as, my employer said something that offended my sense of self on this given day because my identity is whatever, not male, not female, not non-binary, some other category that you just alluded to. So it could be something as simple as that.
Does it add a lot to the 1964 law, or does it just change the definition of sex?
It alters the definition of sex to include sexual orientation and to include gender identity. And it doesn't define what gender identity means. So again, how one thinks about themselves and how one thinks about their gender, which is not the same thing as biological sex, could take any number of forms.
Okay, how does this hurt women? I mean, obviously the women's sports, Trump talked about that the other day at CPAC. That's an obvious one, which is so bizarre because it was progressives who were in favor of having women's sports, and now we have it, and they're the ones who are gonna just destroy it. Beyond that though, how does this hurt women?
Well, I think that's probably the most important way that it hurts women. Essentially, it says that you can't carve out female-only spaces. So if anybody identifies as female, they need to be able to participate in what were traditionally female-only activities, sororities, for example, women's prisons. What else? Any private space, bathrooms is another one, but anything, any space that would be in the past privately for women.
Wow. What would be a way that we could protect the rights of transgender people, whatever that even means exactly, that other than this bill?
Right, so the problem with this bill is not just that it substitutes gender identity for sex and then doesn't really define that. It's that it applies to every context without thinking about what's reasonable. So for example, if Congress wanted to say banks can't discriminate in giving loans or credit to transgender individuals, that would be a rational thing to say, right? Nobody's in favor of banks discriminating against somebody because they're transgender. Or they could say, employers in certain situations, can't discriminate against transgender individuals. Now, there might be certain exceptions, right? Education, you might not want a kindergarten teacher who's a transgender. But the point is that Congress hasn't thought about this. The role of Congress is supposed to be to take evidence and to be able to ascertain what works in what context and not just change the law for everything across the board.
Yeah, in such an undefinable way. All right, well, what's the status of this? Where is it at right now? And do you think this thing's going to pass?
So it passed the House. It heads over to the Senate. President Biden said, well, he's indicated he would sign it. We'll see what happens in the Senate. And, I would urge our senators to realize that opposing this bill does not mean that you're against protections for gays and lesbians or for transgender individuals. You can favor protections for those individuals and still be against this bill. Because what this bill does is it uses a meat cleaver when what is really needed is a scalpel.
Yeah, so what's the argument that the left would say about the sexual orientation part? Because we talked a lot about the gender part here.
Right.
So what about the claim, I guess what a gay activist group or something would say, I can be fired because I'm gay, right? Is that true?
So most state laws actually prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Federal law did not until last spring. Last spring, the Supreme Court held in Bostock versus Clayton County that employers may not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So that, the right to be free of discrimination in the workplace already exists under federal law based on the Supreme Court decision of last year. So this Equality Act is not necessary to protect people from employment discrimination at work. It's just not necessary.
Jennifer Braceras, Independent Women's Forum. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Equality Act. Call your senator. That's where it's at right now. Tell him no. True story. Mike Slater will come back with HR 1. Doesn't have a name. Yeah, or no, it does have a crazy name, just like this one as well. But it's the opposite of what they say it is. Right next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we just talked about the Equality Act. I think what we're going to talk about here is even worse than that. Not only is it the bill worse, but the name of it's even worse, right? You thought the Equality Act was bad. The bill I want to talk about here is called the For the People Act. I'm not an idiot. Like, I despise politicians enough. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. The For the People Act. It's really the Ensure Democrats Remain in Power Forever Act. It's about voter reform. The president spoke a bit about what he, and I agree with him, what we need to do with voter reform. Here's what he said at CPAC.
We need one election day, not 45, 30, one day. And the only people that should be allowed to vote by mail are people that can be proven to be either very sick or out of the country or military where they can't do it. One day. They have millions and millions of ballots sitting around all over the place for long periods of time. Gee, I wonder what happens with those ballots. I wonder what happens. It's common sense. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. There should be a legitimate reason for someone to vote absentee. Has to have a reason. We should eliminate the insanity of mass and very corrupt mail-in voting.
All 100% right. Grover Norquist is here. He's the president of Americans for Tax Reform. Mr. Norquist, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to talk to you. So let's talk about HR 1. I obviously want to talk about what we should do, more things that the former president talked about. But what is HR 1 exactly?
Well, HR 1, given the number, and SR 1 on the Senate side, is the top priority of the Democrats, and that is to change the rules, on elections. To take it away from states making these decisions, to make it difficult to purge people who are dead or have been dead for some time or have moved out of state for some time, to require people to do mass mail-out ballots to folks, not leave it in the hands of states to police and make sure that it's real. It would basically degrade all of the procedures and protections that, for instance, Jimmy Carter and Baker decided after the 2000 election. They had a list of important things to do, mostly secret ballots and not having them mailed around promiscuously. And those are all things that get in the way of people manipulating the ballot. So they want to make it easy to have fraud, difficult to detect fraud. And then they go beyond that to saying if you write a contribution to a politician or a political group, it all has to be public. So when people contributed to the Anti-Gay Marriage Act initiative out in California, that was leaked by Democrats inside the administration, the IRS, inside the IRS. The actual IRS people were giving that information out illegally, and then it was used to dox people, to go after and threaten people. The Supreme Court in the past has ruled that when Alabama wanted the list of everybody who gave money to the NAACP, they said you can't do that because people have a right to contribute politically and not be attacked for it or have their address printed, which is what this bill would do. Your address and how much money you gave to anybody, and then it's also the government will fund much of the campaigns. They've decided they can't win under the present rules. And even though everybody's writing stories about how the Republican Party is falling apart, as they did in 64 and 74 and 86 before, they were always falling apart and about to cease to exist. But in the 62 years before 1994, that was the year when 90% of all the Republicans said, I'll never raise taxes, and they put it in writing. During those 62 years, the Republican Party won the House and Senate twice. For 4 years, 2 times they won an election to have the House and Senate, 62 years. That is a one-party state for 62 years with one blip on the House and the Senate. Since then, the Republicans have won the House and the Senate more often than not, more than 50%, almost 2/3 of the time. And the Democrats don't know how to govern except through Congress. That's what they've been doing for 62 years, uninterrupted by Republicans getting in the way. From time to time, a Republican president would slow things down. But if you run Congress, you run the government, with the exception of starting wars. So they think it's a long time before they get to run the country again. And yeah, they've got it by their fingernails, 5 or 7 votes in the House, 0 votes or 1 vote in the Senate. Both of those are likely to disappear in 2 years as people react to Biden's overreach. So looking at all this stuff, they figure they're not coming back unless they change the rules and how you vote. And they also want to have permanent control of changing the rules. And that is that the Republicans and Democrats would each put 2 people in, then the president would put somebody on a 5-person board, the FEC. Right now, the Republicans and Democrats have to agree to go after somebody. This would allow the president's party to cast the deciding vote to go after anybody they wanted to and cancel you from if you say a bad word or say something that they say is a bad word or they have a bunch of words, all of which anything you or I might say to criticize a Democrat would be considered breaking the rules. And so you'd not be able to speak for 4 months before the election. Literally, speech police organized by the government.
Would that be imposed against candidates?
Candidates are policed as well, but also citizens commenting, letters to the editor, commenting on Facebook, buying an ad, sharing it with people. Yeah, ABC can say anything they want, but probably not Fox.
So you're telling me there's this would create a 5-person board?
Yep.
Two Republicans put 2 people, Democrats put 2 people, and the president puts a person. So that would make it a 3-2 board. And they have the ability to do what?
To mute people, to say that you can't talk because you did something wrong. They could decide that however you were financing your campaign, they could announce an investigation against you. I don't know, 7 days before the election, perhaps. All the sorts of things that aren't done by the FEC now, but are done by left-wing groups where they announce they're going to investigate you. This will be the government with subpoena power going after you. It is the politicization of elections because they don't think they can keep winning unless they change the rules.
Let's go back to the first thing you said. You talked about, it seems to me, make sure I want to know if I'm characterizing this right, it would federalize the elections. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. If you wanted to have a voter ID requirement, you could do that for your state elections, but not for the federal ones. So you have to have like an extra different elections on a different time. It really would change the rules to make it difficult for any Republican to win. And again, federalizing it, making sure that states that want to have more security can't.
Which is so crazy because the conservative thought on voting is every citizen votes once. Like that's the conservative reform. Like if we had to write a bill for conservative reform, like every citizen votes one time. That's our bill. And theirs has all these other the things that are all opposite, like mail-in voting. So what would it do with mail-in voting?
Make it difficult or impossible for states to prohibit it or to not send it to everybody. They want ballots sent out to everyone, and that includes to people who were registered but don't live there anymore or died but not recently. There is the challenge you have where people can pick those ballots up, fill them out, and carry them in, allows somebody to vote other people's ballots. Before we had the Australian ballot, which was the secret ballot, people in the United States used to carry their ballot and you'd see somebody vote. You'd see how they voted. When they went to the Australian ballot, voting declined about 7%. Why? Because people weren't walked to the polls by the person who was paying them for their vote. And because you don't walk somebody into a private secret ballot and have the guy vote, you don't know that he voted for your guy. You're not giving him $5 for, to maybe vote his conscience. And so you actually saw a decline in voting when it was made secret because people were no longer walked in. The left complains, well, if we can't stand there and watch the guy fill it out and we fill it out with him, for him, that ups the number of people who vote. Well, ups the number of people who cast a ballot, which you could decide to throw away if they voted wrong, or that you vote if it votes right. That guy's no longer casting that ballot.
Whoa, we got to go. It's 10 seconds. Where is this? Did this pass the House or anything yet?
Past the House, it is. We'll probably pass the House several times. It's where the Senate is where it can be stopped because unless there's a change and allowed the filibuster to be set aside for this one bill or for a portion of this bill. Right now, Mencken has said no doing away the filibuster. He has made that very clear. And I think as long as he stands up for that, if he can stand up to the pressure, this won't happen. But the other team wants...
comes down to Manchin. Yep, we got to run. Grover, good to talk to you. President of Americans for Tax Reform. All right, call your senator, Equality Act and the For the People Act. No on both. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.